once again for tuning in to Coda Conversations. If you've missed any past episodes, catch up with us at www.codaconvos.com. I'm Kevin. I'm here with my host, Brian.
How you doing? Brian Russick, professional musician, drum teacher. You can find me on brianrussick.com.
And tonight we have a special guest, Chase Bethea, award winning video game composer. Man, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thank you guys, but thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Awesome, man. Usually to get things started, we like to get into our guest background a little bit. So can you tell us like what led up to you getting into the video game industry?
Sure. So the long short of it, I usually do with the interviews is that I
Yeah.
bought a book. I read half of the book. It's called Complete Guide to Game Audio by Aaron Marks, and then I posted my work on a game development forum based off of what the book had told me to do. I could put out a couple demos. I landed one gig. It was my first paid ship title, which was Electron Flux on mobile. I have to say it's mobile now because ever since leading up to the 20, there's been a game that came out on PC and it's Electron Flux. It's not the same game because my game came out in 2012. So
Okay.
that's just long short of the story of how I got into game music, video games.
Awesome. So like were you always into composing music since like high school, or when did you really get into actually composing music?
Honestly, I had a saxophone that my dad had got me, and I got tired of playing hot cross buns and concrete rows. So I was doing something called transcribing, and I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. My father didn't know about anything called sheet music. So I was just writing, I knew how to read, so I just was writing the letters of the notes. So I was
Yeah.
just transcribing stuff from, I'd turn on the radio and hear a specific jazz song and just try to mimic that. And then that led me to kind of just writing my own stuff. And then I had the Game Boy camera and I was writing. Technically, I was writing game music back then. Think about it.
Were
So
you ever
that's what it
using like
was.
Fruity Loops, FL Studio?
Yeah, I started on FL Studio 3,
Me too. Me too.
2001. Yep, that was then the first thing I showed to somebody when I burned it on a CD, and I showed it to this girl named Tasha at the bus stop. And the
Yeah.
first thing she said to me was, "Sounds like should be in a video game."
Oh
Perfect.
wow.
Yep, I was
That was
in
almost
Perfect.
ninth grade.
prophetic. So like were you a big video game fan prior to getting into music, like composing music?
Yeah, I think most people start an instrument at the age of 6, and I was playing games. So I had figured out how to hook up a in television that my grandma thought was a fax machine, and rightfully so because that thing doesn't look like a video game. But I had the box, and I was
Yeah.
looking at the box. I was saying to my grandmother, I was saying, well, she said it was a fax machine, but it's got these pictures on here. And I know fax machines, and I've never
Yeah.
seen one with pictures on a
I've
box
never
like this.
seen
So
one like
I
this
think it
before,
might,
huh?
be a game console. So I've been playing
Yeah.
games since I was a child.
Oh wow, you started like
Nice.
way back. So like what games really had a soundtrack that inspired you? Like for me, obviously Mario, Mega Man, you know.
Yeah, I love this because I'm not that person that was struck with those soundtracks. I got the most
Okay.
obscure, esoteric type of soundtracks that I was influenced by. So I usually say when people ask, it's Turok: Battle of the Dinosaurs.
Okay,
I heard
yeah.
you heard that one?
Okay.
N64.
No, that's Game Boy.
Oh, Game Boy. Okay.
Battle of the Dinosaurs is on Game Boy, and Turok
Wow.
64 is the 64, and then it seeds later.
Okay.
No,
Now,
yeah,
what
this
about
is
like Battletoads Double Dragon on Game
nope,
Boy?
nope,
Never played
no.
that one? That's got
I
a good
played it, but
soundtrack.
later. But those weren't my influences. My influences Final
Okay.
Fantasy Legend 2, known as like Saga
Mhm.
2.
Oh,
I
Final
played,
Fantasy for
yeah,
sure.
but the Legend 2 version, like I didn't get till 7 until a bit later. And so
Yeah.
those are the type of things. Beyond Oasis on Sega Genesis. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't mention that. They don't, but that's Yuzo Koshiro's other masterpiece that I consider in that regard. You know, the people know him for like Streets of Rage, but I prefer the Beyond Oasis soundtrack. So those are the things that I grew up in my childhood. Tomb Raider 1996 on PS1. Definitely shout outs to the composer there, Nathan Nacree.
Yeah, that's like really unorthodox, you know. Obviously, a lot of people gonna say Sonic, you know,
Right.
Mario, but
Yeah,
Right.
you're
yeah.
really digging into the crates there.
No, yeah. Well, and I played some of those games. I played the Mario, I played Sonic, but those weren't the soundtracks that really stuck with me. Those weren't the ones that I was putting my sound test on and learning and doing other things and figuring out how to play them on CD players and tape machines and
Yeah.
those other stuff
Now,
was really good.
what about, do you ever hear this game called XEXYZ? It's like a fighter jet kind of game.
Oh, Zex.
I think
I think yeah,
It was on NES.
XEXYZ. It's
NES.
NES. Yeah. The
Yeah.
soundtrack's on YouTube, the OST. But it's
Yep.
like futuristic jazz. It's very cool. I'm a jazz guy, so I really
Me too.
enjoy that soundtrack.
No,
Okay, nice.
So like, did you prefer? I know Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, they had kind of different sound profiles. Genesis more synth based, harder to compose for, whereas Super Nintendo they use like I believe like more samples.
Well, Sega and Super Nintendo did use samples according to their sound chips. The Super Nintendo had like the SBC chip, and the Sega had the YM2612 chip. And depending on the 6 channels that you were using, you had one channel was able to you can utilize for samples to actually enact where that trigger was going to happen for those sound chips. And this depends on the brilliance, I would say, of the composer and the sound team and the programmers. They're able to get the maximum value out of those chips. But FM synthesis for its time was very, very hard to kind of get stuff done. So the masters of those, typically in the demo scene, were the ones that really pushed the limits of, I would say, the Sega Genesis FM sound versus the very nice nuanced sound the SPC chip had for the Super Nintendo.
Right, very different.
Yeah, I think the Super Nintendo is probably better for like RPGs, maybe slower, more orchestral pieces, whereas the Genesis, it had more of that bassy, visceral type of sound. So like techno.
That's tenable, but because if you might not be familiar with the Beyond Oasis soundtrack, but like I said, Yuzo Koshiro did some very orchestral things with that. And so that's what I said with the brilliance in terms of knowing what that chip could do. You could really do it right. Even Crusader on Senti is an Atlas game, very expensive now. But listen to that, and you could almost, if you close your ears, might be fooled to think that's the SPC soundtrack from the Super Nintendo.
Didn't he compose the Streets of Rage soundtrack? It seems like really diverse.
Ask the question one more time.
Didn't he also do the soundtrack for Streets of Rage?
Yes, that's what I was saying earlier. Yeah, exactly. So you went from Streets of Rage to Beyond Oasis. It's a whole
extremely
nice
diverse
palette. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
It's just masterful.
So like getting into your own projects, you have a soundtrack coming out, a Ground Zero OST, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So a Ground Zero is a spinoff from the original game called Aground, which I won my first award for in the industry, the Nix Award for Best Soundtrack. And
awesome.
Thank you. And so the Ground Zero is like kind of like the 3D part of it where you're mining, you're crafting, you're surviving. So you've had hopefully do the inverse of what typical people would do, which is going deeper where you're trying to reach the surface. And so what I've done is that I've made a soundtrack that it seems short, but it's actually really in depth because I've created dynamic music systems to align with the mechanics. So it's not just loops that go with the game. For the first floor of the music track, the first of its kind within that genre of the colony sim, you are able to have the music change based on items. So every time the player switches an item, the music will change seamlessly. And that's just for one part of the game. And then when you go deeper into part of the game, the music will change based off the exploration, the tasks that you do, and the combat that you encounter. And then it will start to be themed around what's the environment that you're in. So Subnautica would be like water or subway stations, until the point where you're meeting to your tasks is like communications, and all the themes of the music are involved around that, all the way up until the end of the game of where it's supposed to kind of culminate.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, how would you program that? How do you embed the music into the actual game?
So there's typical things that you could do is called audio middleware, and you can utilize those things. The most popular ones are Wise, Fmod, Elias, Cryware, Fabric, Mild Sound System. There's 10. I used to be chair of the interactive audio specialist group, so I almost know them. I'm big brain over here.
Nice,
so
nice.
But I didn't use any of those systems. I actually just worked with the programmer from the development team. We created it together. My task, though, is that I figured out how to use it in the musical digital audio workstation, or the DAW that I use, which is Cubase and Nuendo. And I'm able to kind of use an arranger track to stem out specific parts of whatever I write in two different song forms. It's a horizontal form and a vertical form. And the vertical form will determine how many instruments I'm using, and the horizontal form will determine how long that set is for that. From there, I break up the instrument sets of its section, and then I create stems from it, and then I do coding. I know how to do HTML code, and that's the basic engine that we were kind of utilizing. We're using the typical Unity or Unreal engines or Godot
Right.
or Game Maker. So we
Right.
actually have like a semi-custom engine, whereas I've had experience coding before, and I can utilize and put that in there, and then just mostly works. That's it. Just figure out, finesse it. It's a lot of other decimal system finessing, but
Yeah.
it can be done.
Right.
Awesome. So yeah, where can people purchase or even just listen to some tracks for that OST?
Sure, yeah. You can go to chasebethea.bandcamp.com. That's going to be the main place I'm going to be having it released. And then it should be on almost all the streaming platforms except Spotify.
Okay. So just for those who don't necessarily know, CHASEBETHEA.bandcamp.com.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, just to get into that soundtrack a little bit more, like what genre would you say the majority of the tracks are in? How would you describe the sound?
Intelligent think music. So there's some parts of it, because the player, when they're surviving, they're crafting. If you're familiar with these type of sim games, they're spending hours and hours and hours down there. And so that's why I thought, just to kind of break the monotony of just like loops, why not make it ingrained with what's going on with the mechanic and the story, making it almost impossible for you to like turn the music off, because you'd be missing specific cues that are supposed to happen. And so that's why I kind of designed it that way, in that form. And I think it was necessary. So it's mostly, without trying to innovate, I innovated in that actual genre of itself. But I think it's fun to kind of just dive down and get into the form of that. And so that's why I kind of dub it as intelligent think music instead of intelligent dance music, which is IDM. So this is
Right.
ITM. And yeah, that works
Very
mostly.
cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach, because typically games, they go, their music is based on the atmosphere you're in. Like you're a cave, is kind of spooky music, whereas in your game it's more so like what the player's doing, what item the player's interacting with, almost like cartoons, like Tom and Jerry pick up a hammer, the music changes.
They call that in scoring terms Mickey Mousing.
Okay, nice.
But
I
yeah,
never
there's
knew
no
that.
Mickey Mouse in this. It's mostly just like game mechanic and integration, or
Yeah.
dynamic music, or interactive or adaptive music.
It's unique.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when actually crafting the soundtrack, did you work like hand in hand with the whoever makes the story, the creative people, or did they just kind of say, hey, we want this, do whatever you want?
almost do whatever you want. But yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
mean, we have a game design document, and I had a story, and we went over those things. But mostly what I typically would get the developer to work off is something called an audio asset list sheet. And that is and I list what how many tracks you need, where they're going to be needed in the game, the references of things that you think may work, so that I can follow along with the style and the mood and the texture of something that they think that they may like, and then
Okay.
how long it needs to be, and if there's any variations of that sort. And so for me, I take it a step further, and I decide to make it a dynamic music soundtrack, because I just feel in this day and age, I came from loops, so it doesn't make sense for me to perpetuate that if I'm not pushing some kind of sound art form further in that respect. And this isn't new. They've been doing this for 20 years in itself, but I'm doing it in my style, in my way.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So yeah, Brian, did you have a question?
No, nothing specific.
Okay, so like when actually crafting the soundtrack, like let's just say you're exploring underwater, like how do you actually go about like creating that track? Like do you pick like different inspirations from other games and use that as a base, or what is your working process like?
Actually, I have a lot of experience making Subnautica type music for the ground soundtrack. There was two I had to do, which was Subaqueous Metropolis, which was just the underwater city,
Okay.
And there was another one called Ancient Aquatic Energy, which is one that other people really love. So really, it just comes down to instrumentation in terms of things that I melodically or texturally can feel like it's submerged in water and making it feel like water to your ears. And that's my goal, is to kind of subconsciously make you feel that you are underneath, submerged into the ocean or whatever type of water form that you visualize yourself to be, or that you will be in the game.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. What are you writing on? You said Cubase, but are you using, some kind of external device? Like for me, if I'm composing video game music, I use the Korg Electribe, the EMX one, that blue device.
I did use the Korg ES1
Oh,
on the soundtrack.
nice. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't think anybody
Yeah.
else would know, but yeah, I did
Oh,
use the
old
Korg
school.
ES1.
Yeah. Yeah. They, what do they call them? Groove boxes.
Yeah, yeah. So I had that, and that was intentional, because that actually is used mostly, it's used in an organization, which is like a pun name based off of the game, but it shows up there, but then it also shows up in the theme of the subway, because there are certain tracks that I was able to kind of rhythmically do to make it feel like you're on the subway. And so that's the only external instrument I was using. Everything else was most like simple libraries that I just had to create a different sonic identity sound palette that was different from a ground, but then still kind of reference a bit up from the older ground, but make it a modern, a ground zero sound.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Awesome. So like for this particular company, like are you an employee or is it more like on a contractual basis? Because okay, so you're
Yeah,
pretty much a freelancer.
I'm a freelancer, a traditional contractor in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I've played with the freelance lifestyle a little bit, trying to code here and there, and it can be very difficult.
Freelance coding, that's different. Yeah, you often hear that too much. Definitely, recruiters are really happy to snatch you up and put you somewhere
Yeah.
in the company.
Yeah. That's
You're
right.
needed. Yeah.
And like especially with coding, you're competing worldwide. They can go anywhere in the world. So like what did you do to make sure you stood out versus saying like, hey, let's just go hire this guy overseas for cheap and get him in?
You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
You really
And
do. Yeah, you really
it showed
do.
up. There was a project I did many years ago, and they didn't choose me, and they
Yeah.
got some guy from Serbia, and I was like, okay.
Okay.
And then 2 weeks before they had to ship the game, they were panicking. Hey, Chase, can you do this? Yeah, I could do it, but it's gonna cost you, because
Gonna
now I got to
cost
do a rush
you.
job. Okay, yeah, sure. And I was getting it done. But that's the
Yeah.
difference between, I mean, to answer your question, Kevin, is that I'm professional. I came in this industry professional. I came in this industry with a strong work ethic. I came into the industry with humility. I came into the industry with a lot of knowledge and the hunger to learn at the same time. I think that, along with other attributes that I have, allow me to be able to stand out in my own regard. I'm now 14 years into this industry, and it's mostly just, hey, if they want to work with me, cool. If they don't want to work with me, you saved me a headache. You saved me stress, because we probably weren't meant
Right.
to work together.
Yeah, that was an excellent point you made about, being professional. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of people don't really take seriously. If you're that guy, they know like, hey, I need this done and you're going to deliver for sure. They're going to come to you even if you cost more.
Yeah, because I will deliver. And that's the end of it. We want to reach the deadlines. We want to reach the milestones, and that's what's important. And so, like you said, like, a lot of people don't take it seriously, but those that do, they continue to work.
Right.
So I feel like over time, I've checked your LinkedIn out, and you're really serious about building your brand. Like you realize that you have to network, you have to put yourself out there, and I've noticed that as a common theme amongst a lot of musicians.
Yeah, it's integral. You have to at least be able to show what you can do and keep it yourself top of mind, to remind people, because we live in an age where things are just happening so rapidly. You're here today and you're forgotten tomorrow. But one of the things that I definitely stand on is legacy, and it's something that no one could ever take anything away from you. Everything else in this world is borrowed except for legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Like when people think of you, what should they be thinking?
I mean, besides the things I mentioned before, is that my professionalism and my work ethic, but also that hopefully was inspirational to many, and that I was able to kind of write some of the greatest video game music of our time in the era that I wrote it in.
That's ambitious.
So, there's not a lot of black video game composers. So, do you ever get like stereotype, like, okay, make a hip hop soundtrack for us or something?
Yeah, I've been stereotyped for sure before, and I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it has happened. They don't. They're trying not to say it, but sometimes it's like I'm too sharp. So I yeah, I've been stereotyped a couple of before, and then I have to check them, and then they're like, "Oh, we didn't mean to offend you," and like, "Okay, but you kind of did because you asked me anyway."
So
So
they just kind
don't
of
do
like
it.
they
Oh
assume
yeah,
hip hop or
I
something like
assume.
that.
Yeah, I make because I'll say compositions. I'll put the
Yeah.
vernacular in front of them, and they're like, "Oh
Right.
yes, you make beats." And I'm like,
Yeah.
no,
No, it's yeah.
they're not the same. And that's one of the other reasons why I pushed it to forms of dynamic interactive music, is because then it's untenable. Whereas what I can do, I play instruments. I from many different styles. I can play I start on alto saxophone. I can play piano, jazz, and classical. I play harmonica. I can play different percussion instruments. Is that you really can't put me in a box, and no one will ever be able to. I don't belong there.
Do you like John Coltrane? What do you think of Coltrane?
It's interesting you mentioned him specifically.
It's a
I've worked with his
huge
son before.
influence. It's a huge influence for me. Yeah.
I've worked with his son before. I've had the very blessing privilege to work with his son.
Oh,
And
amazing.
Wow.
well, I should say one of his sons, because he has
Yeah.
many. But yeah, it's interesting you said him specifically. So yeah, I have to say I do have an influence in some way.
Can you dive into that experience a little bit? What was it like working with his son?
I've never actually talked about this, so this is kind of
Okay.
exclusive for you. I man, it's one of those feelings that when you aspire about greatness with yourself, you know that you're attracting greatness to you. And I was writing this in the book that is being published this year, but I remember working with him and hearing how his son creates music. You can just feel the generational influence and the intelligence, because not only, and I want to actually make this very well known, not only was his father a great musician, but his mom was as well too. Alice Coltrane was phenomenal,
That's
and
right.
she doesn't get enough flowers and recognition as equal to her husband. And so to work with one of his
Completely.
sons, yeah, I'm sure you concur.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so you can
absolutely.
hear the inspiration through the music while I'm working with him in the room. And you can feel that energy of just of raw form. And it's captivating. But at the same time, you're also thinking, you don't wonder why you're here. You're thankful why you're here, and to be able to be a part
Yeah.
of something that many people won't ever be able to have a story like I have, and story and the experiences that I've had in that regard, because it's not something that just falls in everyone's lap. Not everyone gets that experience. Not everyone knows how to find or
You're
get a
not
hold
gonna
of them.
meet yeah, you're
Yeah,
not gonna meet people like
they're not
that
right.
just on the street
Every on
corner
the
or
street, yeah. It's not,
at the store.
let
You're not gonna bump
alone
into
if you do meet them, you're not going to get that close to them to be able
No.
to say that you've worked on projects with them. It's
Yeah.
just it's such a blessing.
Oh, it's a blessing. Oh, it's awesome to hear.
Yeah, working with a legend, that must have shifted something mentally. Like, oh, I know I can do just about anything I want to do. Like, if he's willing to work with me, this is he has a incredible musical legacy. Well, his family has an incredible musical legacy, and he chose you to work with.
Yeah,
So,
it shows what it showed me is that I'm going to be great as well. And even when they took the time without me ever asking for them to hear my work multiple times and to compliment on my work, the one thing I remember he told me was, "You're already one of the greats. It's just the world
mm,
has to wait to see and hear who you are." I was
Oh,
thinking,
wow.
there it is.
Nice.
that's an amazing point. Is like sometimes people don't always recognize your greatness immediately. You just have to keep on putting stuff out, and then they might catch on. It might be years later, but sooner or later, greatness can't be denied.
Correct.
So yeah, just to dive into that a little more, what do you feel separates like the great from the good to mediocre? Like, okay, this guy is pretty good versus wow, this guy really stands out.
Besides the talent, because there's that old phrase of hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and I think that's very true. I wasn't the best. I wasn't the best musician. I could play, and I did, but I wasn't lazy. I practiced, but I wasn't someone who would just get it. The people who had that type of Mozart influence or genealogy in them, and they can just pick up stuff. But
Now,
what I did see,
you mentioned you were playing saxophone. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, alto sax.
Nice, nice, nice.
So with that, in terms of that genealogy that we take, I started to see other things that they would fall short on. And so what I think the greats are doing is just it comes with their character, is how they treat themselves and how they treat other people, because the talent could be great and you can just be I don't want to curse, but yeah, like you could be a jerk, right?
Mhm.
And those people, they're good, but it's not an all-encompassing like great package that's put together. And so I found through my odyssey is that those greats are the ones that are revered due to not just of their musical talent, but because of their genuine nature of being a good human being and how they were to others. And that just doesn't just fall in music. That falls in line with most of the leaders that we've seen in the world, typically that are always like highly respected, highly revered, and remembered.
Yeah, absolutely. On the journey to greatness, it seems initially you're focused on the technical skills, you're focused internally, and then as rise higher and higher, you begin to go external, spread your gift, teach others. You start thinking beyond yourself.
Correct. Yes.
Now, a lot of I was going to say a lot of musicians that we've had on the show, a common theme seems to be, the journey is not linear. Something will happen, then not, dry spell, then something else pops off. Like, has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. And I'm more meticulous and very specific about the wordings, because the journey for me is something that, like that word, I have a different visualization in my mind. But ever since I've seen the like Homer's like Iliad, the Odyssey, if you've ever seen that, like the film or at least read it, that really I think encompasses the creative in its entire form, because you're at home at some point, but you need to venture out and go do something to put along many uncharted places, uncharted waters, be distracted here, almost get into this very deathly situation there, and you're lost and you're upset and you're trying to find your way home, whatever that means to you as a creative, where home is.
Exactly. And, I think people who really want to strive and achieve greatness, they have to realize that the journey isn't always like a rocket ship. You're not always going up, 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 up. Sometimes you go up,
Exactly.
have a
Yeah,
fall, come back up,
exactly.
plateau a little bit.
Yeah, the period of plateau is just as important as the period of growth, is something my friend had said, and I think it's very profound.
So how do you stay motivated during these periods where it feels like I'm not really making progress or I'm not getting better as fast as I want to do? How do you like
Yeah.
keep going?
I found that I take breaks, and that's been very healthy. Well, and I take them not intentionally. It's just something that just happens. Whereas, and if I don't feel like it, I just don't feel like it, and I just don't do it. And some people are like, "Well, you have deadlines, you have to write." It's like, yeah, but I work in game development, and if anyone works in game development knows what I mean by that, Nate. But the breaks. The breaks are I just I don't search for inspiration. Mostly, I think what I've always discovered the past 6 years is that it comes to me. So I've found inspiration and found in this sometimes some random documentary that it may be on, or some YouTube video, sometimes talking to somebody that I didn't know, like just a stranger, and then maybe they say something to me. It's all around us. It just has to be cognizant of and optimistic to what it is. But by not doing anything, something will happen for you.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me with writing video game music, it was always just, I grew up playing games like Zelda, Final Fantasy, just these very pretty game OSTs, soundtracks, and that really influenced me in my writing. But as you're saying, it's kind of like it comes to you. I wrote a lot for a couple years in a row, but in the past, I don't know, in the past 2 or 3 years, I haven't written anything. So I've just
Mm,
been focusing on drums. So it's kind of like you never with music. That's what I'm saying. It's not linear. Like you never know. Okay, I'm doing this thing with the Korg Elect Tribe. This is cool. This is happening. Okay, no ideas for that. Okay, let me switch over to acoustic guitar. Let me switch over to the drums, hand percussion. Just like trying to find inspiration wherever it's gonna pop up.
exactly. I've talked about this before as well, is that we've lost most creatives I've talked to have lost the innocence of their childhood from that imagination form, because when we have to become adults, we have to become responsible, especially if some of us are parents, then we have to be even more responsible. And so with bills, with rent, mortgage, obviously family, those that creativity is becomes very lost. And so what I for me specifically, I remember having a toy chest growing up, and the toy chest was wooden. And I'd open that toy chest and I'd take out a specific truck, and it was a fire truck. And every morning around 6 in the morning, I'd figure out how to get out of my crib, believe it or not, figure out how to get on my crib, get on the toy chest, come on down, take out this fire truck, and go outside my room and put it in this open area to wake up my parents every single morning. And so I just loved
Wow.
playing with my toys. And so I thought, well, what if I recreate that? And so I started collecting instruments over the years. And that is my new toy chest. So, like you were saying, Brian, is that you go to different instruments because sometimes something that we touch, we hear, could be the spark of an inspiration of something else. And so that's for me is what I have, is like a tub of different instruments, and that's my new toy chest as an adult. And that's for experimentation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think it's very important at first to just stick with one instrument. But I think once you're grounded, once you have like a solid foundation, maybe we're talking 5 years in, 10
Right.
years in,
Right.
then maybe jump over to the keys, try to do some piano, try to do some, or, mix up the styles. Like lately, I've been playing like Brazilian jazz, and
Mm.
it's really pushing me. So I'll start my practice sessions with the Brazilian jazz, and then after that, I'll do like rock or pop, more like 4/4 timing, and just like more basic. And then what's funny about that is you start off with the real complex stuff, then you go to like more pop and rock. Is like, oh, this is a cakewalk. This is easy
Yeah.
compared to jazz.
Yeah. Milestones.
So, like in terms of picking instruments, I think it's just really interesting how the mind works. Like, so I started off with an electric guitar,
Mhm.
got that 3 months ago, played it a little bit. I didn't like it that much because I got like bigger hands. So, doing the little chords, it was difficult. So I picked up the bass. I was like, wow, this is me right here. And I just been playing that nonstop.
Awesome.
I just
So,
got a bass as well for a project that's coming out in summer,
okay.
of another game soundtrack and a game. And I actually played all the bass in the entire soundtrack, but I
Oh,
have
wow.
no idea how to play. I've taught myself just trying to get through. And yeah, it's cool. And I have an acoustic guitar that I got last summer, but I
Awesome.
love it because it's the one instrument I told myself I'm not playing this to learn it. This is just for fun. And it actually has been the stress reliever because I can just play my own little, I can play tunes that I really like and try to figure them out. And I just have it there, and that's it. It's really great.
You talk about acoustic
The
guitar?
acoustic guitar. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love guitar.
I think you mentioned a really important point about like if you need to take a break, you will take a break, and that kind of ties into you just having the acoustic just to have fun. Like everything doesn't have to be about
Mm,
progressing your skills or making more money.
yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta do
Exactly.
have fun.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it comes back to what I was saying, is that childhood creativity and imagination. We used to be able to have fun, and that's what that instruments for, is that I play that just to just figure things out. And when I
Just to
play it
mess
and I pick it,
around,
just to mess
explore.
around, explore.
Yeah,
Exactly. And when I do
yeah.
that, there's no pressure. There's no time limit. I gotta practice for 10 minutes a day. I gotta do this. It's nothing. It's like, I'm gonna play this and I'll play as long as I want till I don't want to play. And if I want to play in 10 minutes, I'll come back and pick it up again. If I don't, I don't. And it's been so cathartic and relieving and liberating.
Sounds like a blessing.
Yeah, and I think we have to realize that we're running a marathon. Like, you can't always be sprinting. You can't just be working nonstop. I've had to work past it myself. Is like feeling guilty. Like, should I be taking a break or should I be trying to progress my skills in this specific avenue? And I
Right.
realized there's nothing wrong with taking a break, because if I didn't, I would get burnt out and then I might stop permanently. So
You need
Yeah.
that time you need that space to figure things out, I think, so often at the time.
Yes, absolutely. It's very important because I've had spent seasons myself. And in one of the chapters, I talk about pressing pause, and I have it. Whereas in the analogy of the visual is that I'm pushing the a button on the PlayStation 1, whereas in it's an analogy to just know, like, hey, are you going to turn it off, or you're just going to open the disc? What's going to happen? Mostly that you're thinking about based off of how much you push yourself. You only have so much energy in the day. We all have the same amount of time. It's supposed to be like, I don't have enough time. We all have the same amount of time in the day. Just be very clear, but you don't have the
Right.
same amount of energy. That energy has to be managed very well to get you through the day.
Because it's gonna waver. Sometimes you're gonna have, like for me, a couple years ago, I just had surges of inspiration. I would
Mm,
stay up late into the night, writing, composing on the Korg Elect Tribe,
yeah,
and I create all these great ideas. But past 3 years or so, nothing, no motivation, no inspiration. But now I play drums 2 hours every day. So, go
mhm,
figure, like, you never really know. That's kind of what I'm saying, non-linear. At one moment you're playing the piano, next moment you're over here on the guitar, you're on the
yeah,
bass,
yeah,
on the synthesizer, like just like mixing it up to try to find, like, bro, really to try to find try to find, where am I today? Who
yeah,
am I this month?
right, right,
And to have people not put you into a box. I
right.
don't think anyone likes being put into a box in any way, shape, or form.
Right. I don't think so. Especially as any creative, I don't think so. Whether you're an artist or whether you're
Correct.
drawing or even, code, I think is an art as well, because that can be pretty good and beautiful. I think about like the ASCII code and things of that time. Like that was art to me. And so it doesn't matter. Like, no, you shouldn't be doing that to people.
And yeah, I think another important concept that was just mentioned was the pivot. Like, what you were yesterday, you might not be today. So you might have to completely veer off in another direction. And you just have to have the bravery and courage to do that. But that may be where you really need to go.
Yeah, exactly. And you never know where it will take you. So like again, back to the Odyssey. You're taking the risk, you get back on the ship and you'll find your way where you need to be.
And yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned Odyssey, because I think life is like a journey. Like, typically in America, we think in terms of goals. I get to the destination, goal done. Now what do you do?
Right.
You still have to keep going. Life doesn't stop.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a big thing is just appreciating the journey, all of the steps, the ups and downs, not just worrying about getting to this destination. Like, oh, I got money, or I'm working with this great company. Like, you have to enjoy any position that you're in.
Yeah. It's always easier to talk about. Thankfully, I've done both. I've talked about being in the Odyssey at the darkest of my times while I'm in it. I've done interviews, whereas, and I really have been thinking in my mind, like, why am I doing this interview right now? And I've been in that space. And when it's hard to come in an appreciating factor when you're going through it, it's obviously easy to talk about it when you're through it and you're
In
on the positive side
hindsight,
of it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
in hindsight,
obviously, but I'm
everything's
telling
like,
you,
"Oh, I should have done this. I should have done X, Y, and Z." But, like,
yeah,
in the moment, you're like, "I don't know what to do."
in the moment, it feels like like nothing matters.
Yeah.
Nothing matters. But and so the appreciation is a really interesting perspective. The one thing I remember pulling from that and that is that I've even though I would most people who felt that way they wouldn't show up to an interview to do a podcast. They wouldn't show up to do anything. They don't do anything.
Right.
But one thing I thought about is that as many of those have I had the past at least 3 years or 4 years is that I still did it. I would get off and say, I didn't want to do that, but I did it. And that is the smallest inspiration thing I would inspiration or I would say the appreciation that I would get from that. And obviously I'd be back in the midst of it all. But do remember that in the moment is like, well, I did it. And then that was it.
That's powerful. Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, that's a great point because sometimes the path to greatness is not always this huge, complicated, grand gesture. Sometimes just getting up and doing it. Like you want to work out and get big muscles, you just get up and go lift some weights.
You got to do the work and the perks come with the work. But it's the path unwalked is the hardest path.
So like yeah, in the
Exactly.
midst
It's
of
the
all of that,
journey. It's the
yeah.
journey. Yeah.
So you spoke of unwalked paths, that comes with a lot of uncertainty. So like, how do you navigate uncertainty? Like you don't necessarily know where this is going to go, but you're just going to go ahead and see where it takes you.
I've learned the biggest lesson I think has been the greatest blessing in terms of an awakening for me is that I go into things with zero expectations. I had this thought and I
That's
applied
great.
it to movies because movies were declining for me in terms of when I was watching a lot of films of like 6 7 years ago. I was just going through films, and then I was going to see them in theaters because I loved going to the theaters and that experience and being. And then I was just thinking, being so excited because I probably had that childhood feeling of like, oh, I'm going to the movies because it's something I always enjoyed, and then the movie sucked, and I'm like, oh, and then I feel weird after because the story wasn't good or something, and like whatever, and
Yeah.
so I just adopted this mindset of, okay, I'm gonna go into zero expectations. I saw a trailer. I know the formula, but I'm just gonna go in. I don't want it to be. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be bad. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be good. I just don't know what's gonna be. And
It's
if
just
I'm
gonna be an
pleasantly surprised,
experience.
right?
Yeah.
And if I'm
It's gonna
pleasantly
be an
surprised,
experience.
that's icing on the cake. But if it sucks, then I'm thinking, well, I didn't have any expectations anyway, so it was great. But
Yeah.
when I applied that to life, in terms of every day, in terms of what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do this or what it's going to be or who I'm going to meet or where I need to go, especially what's going to happen or who I'm going to work with, that has been another liberation that has just been so great to have because I don't know. The ambiguity is what it's going to be. And if it's something great, then it's cool. I've had enough life experience now, at least, where I know if it's some BS, then it's BS. But
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's
to
it.
me, it sounds like just like a whole paradigm shift. Like you're just like totally mixing things up. How do you feel in the moment?
Yeah.
And that's really important for me. I teach drums. That's
Mm,
primarily what I do, teach drums. And I always tell people I teach feel and groove. I don't teach out of books anymore. I try to get
mm.
people out of their head and into their bodies.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she was talking about her son that used to work with her at a music school. And she said her son said, like, how can I teach drums? I can't teach that to them. But you just described it the best way is that it's about the feeling, and everything is about a feeling in this life. It's everything has a rhythm and a pattern. Every single thing. People have rhythms and patterns. If you notice, it's like, oh,
Absolutely.
I thought they were going to do that. That's because they had a pattern.
Yeah, right, right.
So yeah, you kind of mentioned earlier that you were working on a book. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the book is called Student of the game, how I've navigated the video game industry the past decade. And I'm breaking down imposter syndrome because I don't believe in that. I'm breaking down what it really means to be networking at a mature level, because I think a lot of people have this misconception in terms of what networking truly is. And they're talking like, oh, make friends. And thinking, well, the way you made friends as a child when you went to school and they had a cool t shirt is not the same way that you make friends
It's
in a
a little
mature way.
different on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Little bit
There's
different.
a little bit different etiquette. There's different mannerisms and
Yeah.
behaviors, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
other, people may not like you, and that's okay, because then that that they're not going to be benefiting your time, and there's nothing to be forced. You can't force work with people because you are looking for something to help benefit your situation. And so I talk about that in the book. I talk about my own anecdotes and experiences from where I am as a professional multi-award winning video game composer, for how it got there, and things I've dealt with developers and other colleagues in the industry, my mentors, my family, my influences. But they're anecdotes and experiences that also offer solutions about a mindset that I think should take carry forward. And it's the first of its kind, because all the other books that I've read over the years, and many that I've studied for video game music, always talk about the techniques and the surface level of those things, but no one has been an entire book about this has been what it is.
Very cool.
Awesome. When is the book going to be finished, and where can we get it at?
It will be shipping and finished in November of this year, 2025, and it'll be through the CRC Press publishing company. And so we are going to be, you can just get it from there or reach out to me. I'm sure I'll have it on the website. I'll definitely be promoting it. I'm doing a book tour along with other tours that I'm doing, music tours.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Nice.
it'll be
Nice.
there.
So in case people missed it, what was that title again?
Student of the game, how I've navigated game audio or the video game industry the past decade.
Awesome.
That's an awesome subject. Like that's just, I think a lot of people trying to break into the industry, it would be a great thing for them to read a book like yours because it's breaking down, okay, I went through X, Y, and Z, and this is, the tool that I use to get through it, or this is the mindset I use to get through it. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm very fortunate to have the publishing back me with this, because the timing of it, and it'll again, as I speak about legacy, it is timeless. More people will come into the industry over time. I usually see it as like high school, and then some of us will be the veterans and they'll graduate and they'll retire, but there'll be new folks who want to do games and write game music, but they don't talk about the mentality. But the mentality, like I said, is I'm someone who understands patterns and rhythms in life. And so if I can help people navigate that and solve some of the issues that they think that they're having, and not have to go through what I've gone through, then I've helped someone else better their life. Just kind of like how that book helped me get into the game industry. When I read half of it, I eventually finished the book. It took me 5 years, but when I got through halfway, I was thinking I don't need to read the half of the book anymore, because I figured it out. But and I
Right.
wasn't. I did, and when I finished the book because I wanted to. For me, it's like, you bought the book, you better finish it. And it was just stuff that I had also learned along the way. But the biggest thing
Yeah,
was how to do it. So how that book helped me is how I'm hoping that will help the next generation of game developers.
that's awesome.
Awesome. Like one of the things I hear from people in a variety of industries is they pretty much started saying yes to everything, meaning like, early on, you might start declining a bunch of projects, but those opportunities could lead to better opportunities. So just like you say, hey, I'm gonna come on this podcast. Um, how important do you feel like saying yes is, and what do you say no to? Like when do you know, okay, I'm gonna back away from this?
So I remember hearing that when I was in audit engineering school. And I do think if you're starting out and you have the capacity and you have the energy, this is things that I hear being said with those specific words. If you have the aptitude to take on the projects that you say that you want to say yes to without sacrificing or compromising your health, meaning your mindset, meaning things that you can take on, your competency, whereas you're not stressed out, take on, to say yes to those things, you're not missing out on anything that wasn't yours. What will be yours in this life, and you will have it. What I say no to is I say no to things that I know I can feel stress signals within my body. So when I feel like I sense a pattern based on the mentality of the conversation, I I'll say no, or I'll pass it to someone else that may be better qualified for that. Not because I'm trying to pass on stress to them. It's mostly this. It won't probably doesn't work for me. It may work for you, and you can assess, how that is.
So
But when
that
I
that
see
kind of
this,
sounds like to me, kind of sounds like you're using, you're relying on your intuition to decide, okay, I'm going to take this project. No, I'm going to reject this project. Would you say it is very intuitive, your process?
I'd say it's part intuition and part experience, because without the experience, I wouldn't have built up the intuition.
That's powerful.
Yep, that's really interesting. And you know what's really interesting is life is just like music, like you've been mentioning, is patterns and rhythms. I know one thing with rhythm and patterns, if you hear the same thing over and over, it gets monotonous. So, how do you keep things fresh? How do you avoid just, getting bored doing the same thing over and over?
I think because I think differently, I understand that I wouldn't want to hear that. And I've absorbed so much music in my life that I purposefully don't do it that way. There was an interview, I mentioned this before on a different interview thing some years ago, is that I heard an interview with Alfred Hitchcock. And the Alfred Hitchcock was being interviewed, and the person interviewing was like, "Well, I know what you're gonna do anyway. So why don't you just tell me? Why don't you just show me?" And Alfred Hitchcock's response was, "Do you?" And it's true. If you look at some of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, I mean, The Birds is one that takes a whole left turn. Psycho is one. I remember seeing
That's
Psycho for the first
wild.
time, and I'm thinking
That's
the movie is
wild.
going to go one way, and it does not go that way at all.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what I think about in terms of the thinking of something. And also something from Mad Men, where Don Draper, the character, said, "If you don't like what's being said, change the conversation." And I took that and applied as, like, I didn't like what was being heard, so I wrote something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And I don't, like I said, I grew up with that loop era, and I understood that. So I understand now what it is and what I can do to make it different, because if I don't want to hear it that many times, I'm sure someone else out in the world doesn't want to hear it that many times too. So I'm going to create the best oral candy I can for that. And that's why that Ground Zero soundtrack is so dynamic. And in terms of changing the items, I've never played a game that did that before. I'm thinking, wow, that'd be kind of cool. It breaks the monotony there. The theme of this breaks the monotony here. You're down for that there. And then because I'm a player first and a musician second, I
Right.
understand the mechanics of it better.
Right.
Yeah, it's an amazing answer. To kind of close, because we're near the top of the hour. You spoke a little bit about networking. Now, something that I've heard from a lot of like musicians or just people in a variety of careers is like when you network, you don't necessarily want to go in with this super targeted objective, like, okay, I'm gonna close this many deals, or you don't want to come off as transactional.
Yeah. It's everyone's going to be who they're going to be. And what I've learned and what I've observed as well is that I've seen those people who want it to be transactional, but and some of them are successful, but how is it long term for you? You talked about the marathon, and it's very, very true. What I did in terms of that is to learn to do the marathon mentally, is that I had to put through my body physically to see if I could actually run a marathon, because your brain controls your body in that regard. And if your mind is not clear enough to believe that you can actually run a physical marathon mentally for a field as rigorous and that is very intense and competitive as games, you probably won't be able to get that marathon through. And so with the networking aspect is, again, I've applied zero expectations. I treat myself the way I want to treat others. So I treat myself with respect and courtesy and dignity. I don't treat others the way I want to be treated, because I found that mantra has not been true. And so I know I take care of myself. And so I know if I see someone who I think takes care, or I can see the mannerism, the pattern they take care of themselves, I will be inclined to reciprocate. And it goes along with my 3 pillars of respect, consistency, and reciprocity. And that's how I approach people. Not everybody's going to be for me. Not everybody's going to like me. Not everybody's going to be, we're not always going to gel. And that's just how it's going to be with others. And having these mentalities and these aspects to understand that culminate together, I think is what creates good, mature things. The business will come, but the friendships, you can't force those. So you might as well do the business first on that hand, and maybe you end up becoming friends along that on that side. If the business is not good with the acumen that you don't have or you do have, then it just doesn't work. And that's how it typically is. But most people try to force the friendships to do the business, when you really should just have the business acumen first, and then to see if the friendship spawns from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes me think, with the podcast, I do all the booking, all the marketing. And, if I didn't know what I was doing going into it, I try to just remind myself, hey, just talk to people like, you want to be spoken to, just be casual with people. And I find that, just being very casual, having some, good copy, some good like warm outreach message, you really connect with people, like I'll just say something like, hey, I see you work at Amazon. That's awesome. Just wondering if you want to come on a podcast sometime, do it twice a week, yada, yada. But I think it's really important to make those connections personal, and don't make it, like you're saying, don't make it forced.
Right.
Don't let it be, too casual. Don't let it be too business. You got to kind of, I think you kind of got to find that sweet spot.
Exactly, you do, and that comes with, I mean, it's something that's learned. It's just like people playing the games. You're not gonna go out straight up and beat that Dark Souls, that Elden Ring boss right off the jump. You got to practice through it. And unfortunately, I know there's some introverts out there, and it's awkward, but everything is workable. I've seen some really incredible things in my life for people who had strokes in their minds, who are able to be one of the best piano players in the Ukraine, to someone who was tone deaf to be able to sing musicianship notes in class. I think it's
Wow.
possible to work through these things. The mind are very powerful. If we really want it, we can have it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we're at the top of the hour. We definitely appreciate you for coming on. Did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts?
Yeah, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and make sure that you're always having fun in some form or fashion. And thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man. And just for one more time, where can the audience find you at?
So you can find me at chasebethea.bandcamp.com, or you can check out some of the work on other streaming platforms, or chasebethea.com is where you can find some of the work that I've done too.
Awesome. I just have one closing question for you.
Sure.
For all the entry level game developers, entry level video game music composers trying to break into the industry, what is that one piece of advice that you'd want to, lay out for them?
Stay humble. Don't let your ego get in the way.
That's great.
Awesome. And yeah, we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
Thanks, guys.